Sekeres Price for Thursday, June 27th, 2024, coming to you from the Nation Network studio built by Arbor Lee here at the iconic Wall Center downtown Vancouver. If you're thinking of hosting a company party, give the Wall Center sales team a call. They'll walk you through it. 604-331-1000. Matt Sekeres alongside Blake Price, Grady Sass, hitting switches, conducting things. We have a really big show today, and I mean that. There's a lot going on with these Vancouver Canucks. It's all brought to you by Applewood Auto Group.
Applewood Nissan in Surrey has a spectacular new electric vehicle up for grabs, the 2024 Nissan Aria. A lot of storage space, very slick interior. Been inside. Take one for a test drive. Lease or finance them from 1.99%. That's a smashing deal. It's all at Applewood Nissan in Surrey. It's all good at Applewood.
Poll question today. We are asking you, how do you want the Canucks to spend their cap space, or how should they? Guentzel and spare parts, or a mid-level shopping spree? You can vote at Sekeres Price, the Twitter or X account, YouTube as well. And after the business of the last 24 hours with the re-signing of Teddy Blueger and Dakota Joshua and the trading out of Ilya Mikheyev and most of his salary, this is what we are down to effectively. Are you going to put all your money into that top six winger and then fill out around him, or are you going to get mid-level players for all the remaining roster holes? I've been steadfast on this all off season. I think part of the reason the Canucks were successful last year was because of their depth. I prefer depth teams in the Stanley Cup playoffs to top-heavy teams. I don't dispute that Guentzel is a fine player, a great playoff performer, and would be a welcome addition to the Elias Pettersson wing. But when I look at it and go Guentzel or a winger for Pettersson, who's maybe not at that level, another top four defenseman, whether that's Zadorov or somebody else, I err on the side of the mid-level shopping spree, Mr. Price.
There's three must-fill holes right now, like must-fill. That's if you feel comfortable with Noah Juulsen playing every night. Three must fill. If you're less comfortable with Juulsen playing every night, there's four.
Well, let's bring up that Rob Williams tweet then,
yes.
Grady, because I think that spells it out pretty appropriately. So, assuming Arturs Shilovs comes in at about $1 million, he's an RFA. Canucks with about $17.5 million to spend. You also have to account for Tucker Poolman one way or the other, whether you want to put him on the roster, put him on LTIR after you set your opening night roster and gain that cushion, that $2.5 million cushion, or whether you're forced to put him on prior to and lose the cushion,
right?
But fill out the roster that way. So, take the cap space available left for the Canucks with a grain of salt, because it depends on how people cut it up. But a top six winger, the aforementioned top four defenseman, a third pair defenseman, then a fourth liner and another depth forward or defenseman. Now you look at their depth chart right now, Blake, and part of this depends on, where you want to play Pius Suter, but
you could fill that fourth line. Like they've got a fourth line there of Oman, DiGiuseppe, and Podkolzin.
Mm-hmm.
You could just ride with Abby guys the rest of the way on the fourth line. Or find other guys
at
you could. 900 at 900 mil. But you could just say, we're going to give Karlsson a shot.
Yeah. So I think it's more likely the depth forward than the depth defenseman. Let's remember, they re-signed Mark Friedman as well. And I do think like they feel Cole McWard or Akito Hirose or some combination thereof, maybe even Jet Wu, could serve as the eighth defenseman going forward.
Yeah. Or do they sign Myers,
mm-hmm.
sign Brendan Dillon, and then sign a big name winger free agent?
Mm-hmm.
And then ride with everybody else that you've got.
Yeah. Now, Myers, of course, is a part that's lacking here. And Myers is an interesting case study because he played in the top four role last year. If you re-sign him, he's probably still going to play in a top four role. But as you have talked about, if you go out and get the two righties, then you can move a bigger name right shot defenseman. Top four. You can move Myers down, and then Juulsen becomes your seventh.
But you're not doing Guentzel and Montour. You're doing
right.
Montour and
Right.
a decreased winger.
Right. And in fact, there's word today that the Utah Hockey Club is going to go guns a-blazing over one of these defensemen that are available.
Yeah.
With all sorts of money. So, yeah. Anyways, so I voted mid-level. And here's the thing with Guentzel, everybody. This is crystallizing now. The market for Guentzel is crystallizing. Number one, all the reporting out there is that Carolina is taking its best effort now at re-signing Jake Guentzel. That has been a franchise, and I don't even Don Waddell moving on to Columbus, I don't think is going to change the price of tea there. That has been a franchise that has not been big on rental players. That when they make deadline moves, it's either for players with term or for players that they are looking to re-sign and keep as part of the program. It's the philosophy there with Tom Dundon that we don't want to be giving up assets for several months of a player. So I think Carolina is going to take a hell of a shot here at re-signing Guentzel. In fact, I would not be surprised to see Guentzel re-sign. I also would not be surprised to see Guentzel's rights traded to a team that believes it can re-sign the unrestricted free agent to be. A word today from Elliot Friedman is the Dallas Stars are going to be involved there. Of course, they've lost Joe Pavelski to retirement. And as we discussed yesterday, David Pagnotta saying the LA Kings are going to take an aggressive run at Guentzel, not to mention all the money that Steve Yzerman has moved out in Detroit. So I think you're looking at some pretty attractive suitors there in either big American markets or with competitive American teams. And as we sit here right now, I'm even starting to doubt the possibility of Guentzel more than I did previously,
which is going to
the Canucks.
Here's the thing. I think Jim Rutherford and Patrik Allvin have a very good read on where I don't think they're going to be surprised by what happens with Jake Guentzel.
Well, especially I would think that Jimmy Rutherford has some contacts in Carolina.
Yeah. Between the contacts in Carolina and the history of Jake Guentzel, I don't think the Canucks are going to get blindsided by Jake Guentzel's decision. And that's good in that if they're starting to get an icky feeling, plan B starts to get formulated.
Well, and I think that's part and parcel of why you've seen Blueger and Joshua re-sign here, is they recognize the biggest crime would be to not get your in-house business done, to finish second for Guentzel on Monday, and then start a scrambling. So I think they have started setting the pieces in place to understand we're probably not going to get Guentzel and going to have to pivot. Thus, you get the Dakota Joshua re-signing. Thus, you get the Teddy Blueger re-signing.
Which makes Sam Reinhart an interesting study. If Jake Guentzel gets locked up, does Sam Reinhart look at the market and go, I am the bell of the ball here?
Well, he's the bell of the ball either way, if you ask me.
In terms of statistics,
like, to me, he's a better player than Jake Guentzel. I realize he does not have Stanley Cup. Well, he has the Stanley Cup now, but I realize that when people were setting the pecking order in terms of the UFAs, a lot of people prefer Guentzel because the multiple Stanley Cup rings, because he's been an enormous playoff performer, and there has been good consistency throughout his career. In Reinhart's case, again, we're talking about a player who scored 27 more goals than Jake Guentzel this regular season. And granted, he played all 82. Guentzel did not. We're talking about a player who had 17 more points than Jake Guentzel this season. And we're also talking about a player who finished in the top 5 of Selke Trophy voting as a one of the league's best defensive forwards.
All that being said, I wouldn't bet large sums of money that he outpoints and outgoals Jake Guentzel next season. I might bet a little bit of money, but I'm not betting large sums. Like, topping out, career high before this year was 33 goals. So I think you pencil in Sam Reinhart for 35 goals, but I'm not penciling him in for much more than that. I think it was a perfect season for him. Everything went right for Sam Reinhart, and he's going to get paid commensurate with that. But you have to be realistic about what you're expecting on the other side of the ink drying on the paper. And I wouldn't expect 50 goals from Sam Reinhart myself. That doesn't mean you don't kick the tires, because he is North Shore guy. He'd probably be somewhat excited to play for the for the Vancouver Canucks.
Absolutely. I mean, his dad played for the Canucks.
You can bet dad is in his ear saying, be nice to have you around a bit more. Save us some long flights to see you and see you more often.
You could take full advantage of that Capilano membership a little better, Sam.
That's right.
Get more rounds in.
I don't know what all that is worth for Sam Reinhart,
mm-hmm.
but it's interesting. And now that he has an actual ring to put on that finger, he becomes an interesting prospect. I just don't know. And no one brings up, I mean, how many big name guys, per the poll question, besides Guentzel, who else fits that bill? It's Reinhart,
Stamkos.
It's Stamkos.
And then
maybe
I would draw
Marchessault.
I would draw the tier and say
Marchessault,
you're in the next one. And in fact, given Stamkos is 34, you may draw the tier just at Guentzel and Reinhart.
Yep.
The other thing, Reinhart is 13 months younger than Guentzel as well.
Yeah, so you get an extra season basically.
He'll turn 29 next November, Reinhart. So a month into the season, whereas Guentzel turns 30 right about the start of the season. Anyways, let's get to our top story, and that is Dakota Joshua re-signing with the Vancouver Canucks. It's a 4-year deal at $3.25 million. I got to say, this one came a little bit out of left field for me, Blake. He and Lindholm, I had sort of put together in a category thinking, I think those guys are gone just because I think they're not only going to get more money, but more opportunity elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But Joshua loved his time in Vancouver. Of course, this is the franchise that took a chance on him, saw something there, and helped him develop into a 20-goal scorer. For those who are fretting the Vancouver Canucks' lack of size, well, he ticks that box. For those who are fretting the Vancouver Canucks' lack of penalty killers, because so many of them were UFA, ticks that box. In fact, without considering Elias Lindholm, of course, didn't play the whole season here. That's their top 2 penalty killers re-signed in the last 24 hours, forward-wise. Teddy Blueger.
You've been so worried about the PK. Josh. Are you feeling better now? You bring up the PK all the time. It's your pet project. No, you're not feeling better?
First of all, I dispute the premise. I've just said.
You've been fretting.
Well, Blake, take a look at who are the guys who logged penalty kill time for them last year and where they stood in the offseason. The fact of the matter, Ian Cole, Tyler Myers, Elias Lindholm, Teddy Blueger, Philip Roenick, Noah Juleson, Dakota Joshua. Of the 7 top penalty killers, both forwards and defense, all of them were free agents with the exception of Noah Juleson. So yeah, if I fretted it a little bit, it's because the PK did pretty well last year, particularly as the season went along and in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And they were looking at having to turn over, a full unit and a half.
I guess I was just of the mind that because of the profile of the player that they were in the market for, like if they didn't get Joshua, they were going to get somebody else like Joshua, it would have been a penalty killer. If they didn't get Blueger back, they would have been signing somebody like Blueger, probably a penalty killer.
Yeah, but therein lies the thing. There are not a lot of centers on this UFA market. And there are particularly not a lot of centers who do the PK little things, bottom 6 guy. I know everybody talks about, replacement level player. Go get the star and then fill in. Well, when a guy brings a specific skill set or is exceptional in one area, it's not always as easily done as it is said. So, Dakota Joshua, well, you might have been -2 at wing had you not re-signed him because, of course, you've moved Ilya Mikheyev, so it takes a little bit of the pressure off to go and get that winger. I think it's a very fair contract. It's actually precisely what AFP Analytics predicted the contract should come in at.
They do good work there, clearly.
4 years,
they nailed a bunch, haven't
by
they?
$3.25 million. He's paid like a third liner, not a second liner. And Blake, that was a little bit of a concern that somebody got drunk off 20 goals or 22 goals, whatever it was, in 3/4 of the season, thought, this is a top 6 power forward guy. Well, the Canucks weren't clearly going to go there. And
I heard people saying it's going to begin with a 4.
Right?
Never going to begin with a 4.
And it's term appropriate. It gets him out before age 32. And so you're buying out what should be the best remaining years.
I think you can live
Dakota
with this for
Joshua.
sure. Now,
absolutely.
So let's play floor and ceiling for the next 4 years. I think he's at the ceiling, the production he put up, which is like a 23-goal, 40-point pace. Like that's probably the most you can hope for if he plays an 80-game season. But I think the floor is probably the way he played this season previous, last year, if you will. 11 goals, 12 assists. Like I don't think he's getting worse than that. And if you're getting that out of $3.2 million, you don't hate yourself for it. You're probably wanting a tad, but you don't hate yourself for a guy that gets you 12 goals and 24 points in 82 games. That's an acceptable amount. That's still third line production. It's on the lower end of third line production, but it's still third line production.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're going below that bar. So the risk to me in these 4 years, not terribly high for the Vancouver Canucks.
No. I mean, I just look at the 63 regular season games, the 13 playoff games. So 76 games. Let's give them that as a year in, year out, right?
Yeah.
You get a minor knock at some point that keeps you out for a couple of weeks. It was 40 points and 22 goals. I am very happy paying $3.25 million for that.
Yeah,
especially with a guy who brings some intangibles too. He's a penalty killer. He's got size, toughness, and was very coachable last year too. That's the other thing, right? How much buy-in are you going to get? Now, the key for Dakota Joshua now, because he is a late bloomer, and as we talked about, this is his first shot at real NHL riches. He's got to treat this contract like a starting block, not a finish line.
Oh, for sure. Well, if he plays it well, he's got another contract coming. Like we're seeing 32-year-olds get signed. So he should have that dangling carrot. Now we keep calling him a late bloomer. Here's the thing with him is that because he played the full 4 years at Ohio State University, the Ohio State, he's been in professional hockey since 2020. But only since then.
Well, yeah.
And even then,
2019.
But he was in the ECHL.
Yes.
So, like, a meaningful professional hockey is AHL.
Well, he played in the AHL that year too, but
in 2020.
No, fair. And that's the other thing. You don't see many skaters who have ECHL on the hockey card even become NHLers. Let alone become NHL.
Which is why I'm going to throw out the ECHL experience. Say he's really touched ice in a decent level of professional hockey for now just 4 full years. So he's of the age. His body is still going to age at the same rate as everybody else's flesh and bones. But in terms of what he's learning and where he's learning it, he hasn't been here for very long. So I think he's still learning in that regard. That and again, I'm going to.
So you think there's more upside this year?
No. See, I'm going to. I want to be consistent with that. I'm tamping down expectation that he can be a 30-goal scorer. This is not happening for him. But I think the most you can hope for is that what we saw this year can be repeated fairly regularly throughout this contract.
Let's go to the J-Fresh hockey card then, Grady. Dakota Joshua, a physical two-way net front winger who made a name for himself by scoring 22 goals on 93 shots. That's the other thing. He doesn't require a lot of shots to.
Jay Fresh's follow up to this one says he literally doesn't shoot unless he's a foot from the net,
right?
Which
exactly.
I respect.
Yeah. But he predicts there's probably some regression coming. 22 goals on 93 shots is a particularly good.
Which is sort of what I was like. He's probably right, but the one thing that I would caveat with that is he hasn't been doing this for very long. He's still figuring out,
and he's super coachable. Beginning of last year, Talk had put him on blast. Said, I need to see more from him. And what happened from there? Dakota Joshua put his head down and put in the work. And did what the head coach and the coaching staff asked of him. And at certain parts of last season became indispensable to the Canucks. Now, I would like to see a greater level of consistency. As we talked about in the playoffs, he was Mr. Game 1 there. He was fantastic in the first 2 Game 1s. And then you didn't see a whole lot from him in the subsequent games. There were shifts here or there, flashes here or there, but wasn't the game in, game out, shift in, shift out factor that you would hope. Our buddy Dave Hall from Canucks Army. Canucks have now have one of the NHL's best third lines, and we talked about that last year too. Blueger, Garland, and Joshua, who had turned into one of the best third lines in hockey. It was one of the reasons why the Canucks were successful.
Yeah.
They had a strong top 9 group. Hall, they've got them locked up for the next 2 years at a cool $10 million AAV combined. This is just incredible business. And yes, I suspect they will be the third line again.
At least until the deadline.
Well, yeah, because you suspect that the Canucks are coming with a top 6 winger in free agency. Of course, the other caveat here is Pius Suter, and is he going to return to center ice? And does that slot Teddy Blueger as your fourth line center, which is something that you talked about yesterday, that, you know, for everything that we loved about Teddy Blueger, he's more appropriately slotted as a 4C than a 3C.
Yeah. And a guy that can moonlight. Oh, you got an injury. You got to spend the next month as the 3C. You've got no problem with that. If you wanted to fashion a true cup contending spine of centers, I would rather Teddy Blueger was my fourth line for sure. But they ain't got time.
There's also a world.
They don't have the money for this.
There's also a world where Joshua has to be a second liner.
Right. Yeah. And I think in spells, he probably could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, again, back to the poll question. You tie up all this salary into one special guy, you're going to forego a couple of other spots in your lineup where you'd rather be a little bit stronger.
That's right.
And I don't think one is right, one is wrong. You got to choose which path you're going down.
No, I think one
and
is
commit
right.
to it.
I think one is right. I think cup teams have historically been deeper than top heavy, and that is actually one of the concerns.
But I think you could argue deeper in special players is better than deeper of middling players. Like having more difference makers.
So here's what I've been thinking a lot about recently. The Rutherford Allvin Stanley Cup experience in Pittsburgh was a top-heavy team that got by on defense and leaned on some very special players. The 2 center icemen, yes, they were well supported with some pretty good wingers. Terrific goaltending from 2 different guys, right? Because Murray and Fleury at different times. Name me the other top-heavy Stanley Cup champions. Don't think there's been a lot. Like, certainly this Florida team, what was it? It was terrific depth. That Colorado team was super deep a couple of years ago. Tampa had great depth. As the Tampa experience went on, they had to lean more and more on the top-end players. But certainly when the Tampa dynasty started to form, that was the deepest team in the National Hockey League. We talked about it year in, year out. I mean, look at who Tampa's playing on the third and fourth lines. They would be second and third liners in other markets. So for me and building a Stanley Cup champion, first of all, you absolutely have to have the good top 9. You know, maybe you can get away with a fourth line that, you know, isn't very good or doesn't play a whole lot, but you better have 9 forwards who can really, really play. And you better have 4 defensemen who can really, really play. And frankly, if you've got a third pair that, you know, again, can masquerade as the second pair or would be second pair defensemen in other markets, even the better.
Like you said, Colorado was deep. They had 7 contributing forwards in the playoffs, like 7 very nice forwards to roll out. But even a guy like a JT Compher that year, that was a guy who up until that year, his career high was 16 goals. So we look back on it now.
He was a young player in upswing, though.
He was his 6th season. So you look back on it and you go, oh, that's a nice player, great depth. Well, they had no idea that he was going to be a depth scorer for them up until that point. So, you know, that's the thing when you look back on Stanley Cup teams, we tend to coronate their depth when, you know, any team that goes on a Stanley Cup run is going to get contributions. The question is, how repeatable is it from those quote unquote depth players to do that on another team?
Yeah, I don't know. They made the trade for Lehkonen that year. They had Byram on a third pair. They had Manson and Gerard as a second pair. Like, I don't know. That's Pretty deep team for me, Blake. Well, okay, let's not quibble about the depth of the Stanley Cup champions of 2 years ago.
What you wanted is to put guys on your team that you think can rise to another level, because that's often what we then retroactively look back on as depth.
Okay, again, don't want to belabor this, but the Toronto and Edmonton experiences here, Blake. And if you want to say Edmonton was one game away from the Stanley Cup, fair enough.
Yeah, you have to.
Except the flip side there is maybe the two best forwards in the world and still falling short. Like a generational player, 1 seed, the likes of which nobody else in the league has or is even going to have a chance at getting anytime soon, with all due respect to Macklin, Celebrini, and what looks like a pretty good 2025 draft class. Toronto, lots of high-end difference makers, right? Up front, and particularly when Tavares was younger. Couldn't get through round 1.
But they've neglected the most important position in the playoffs. It's goaltending. In the playoffs, you can get through a regular season without it.
But in part, they've neglected that position, Blake, because they have spent their money on high-end difference-making forwards.
Yep. Yeah, you delete one of those guys, though, and they still got a really high-end
They didn't
group.
get the balance right.
Yeah.
Okay. The Ilya Mikheyev trade. So here are the pros. You get your cap space. It only costs you a trade down in the 2027 draft. It does not cost you a full pick, so you retain some of the draft capital. They recognized a mistake. They weren't too stubborn, because this, remember, was the first big free agent this management group had signed, and they got out of it early rather than waiting for the asset to wholly diminish. And they opened up some cap space, which they've now spent on Teddy Blueger and Dakota Joshua.
Do you connect those dots, though? Did they make the Mikheyev trade to sign Joshua?
I think they made the Mikheyev trade to sign one of Joshua or Zadorov. Yes. That's the dot I'm connecting. And frankly, I think because of the activity here with Joshua and Blueger, I am more doubtful on Zadorov coming back today than I was 24 hours ago.
As am I. Don't see it happen.
I thought they might cave or find middle ground, is perhaps a better way to phrase it, with Zadorov. I wondered whether, as Frank Saravelli told us last week, he anticipates Zadorov would be more likely to blink because he might be a little too fanciful in terms of what he thinks is coming on the UFA market. The cons of this Mikheyev trade, well, there is still retention. So you moved a second-round pick and retained. It deepened the need for a winger, which, again, Joshua may have checked. It's deepened the need for speed, because Allvin talked about he wants to get faster, and Mikheyev, when healthy, can skate. There's a real bounce-back possibility here in the second year off an ACL. Every physiotherapist, doctor will tell you it takes longer than you think, and look at that second year back.
For some.
Not that first year back. Of course, the Canucks have suffered through watching Jason Dickinson bounce back, watching Oliver Ekman-Larsson bounce back. And, the fact is they could well use a winger like him at some point next season, and maybe on the trade market for a winger like that come next year at the deadline as they fortify their team, looking to make their best push in the postseason.
I mean, you say this deepens the need. They didn't even put him in the lineup some nights. He was a fourth liner. He was rarely, if ever, on the third line.
Sorry, Mikheyev?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Once he got into the huge slump, yes.
Yeah. I mean, he played his way into the press box. And it's easy to say now, the second year out of the surgery might be. No guarantee. It's not like they're staring down the barrel of a guarantee that he's going to be better, going to find his legs more than he did this past season. So, I mean, I think you have to go with what's in front of you.
Yeah.
And
now
what's in front of you was not a winger that they wanted to use.
Right.
So now you've got $4 million, or just over $4 million, to try to replace a guy that you really didn't want to use anyway. I think it's a
Well,
slam
I mean,
dunk.
Allvin talked about how he expected a bounce back at the end of the season from Mikheyev, and he did play more than Höglander average time on ice and some other forwards the Canucks used. But point taken. Point taken.
He's I wish the best for him by all accounts. A very nice guy, and I think he might need to change his scenery as well, and that can be said for all these guys that bounce back. A lot
and he
of
waived to go to Chicago, so
Yeah.
he did the Canucks a solid, much like Kuzmenko did the Canucks a solid.
And they might give him top 6 time with a thin Blackhawk team, right?
Yep. Now, how about this? The Canucks and Hawks, as Canucks Army noted, have now made 3 cap-related trades over the last 20 months. The Canucks have picked up Riley Stillman, who they moved on, a 2024 fifth-round pick, a 27 fourth-round pick, and $9.5 million in cap space for a return of Jason Dickinson, Anthony Beauvillier, Ilya Mikheyev, a 24 second-round pick, and a 27 second-round pick. They have turned Chicago into their own personal Arizona.
Yeah.
For contracts that you no longer want.
Between the Flames, the Hawks, and the Panthers, there's 3 repositories for former Vancouver Canucks. You're only allowed to use those 3, though.
Mm-hmm.
Anything out is a fine.
Mm-hmm. So the moral of this story is Patrik Allvin has found his mark in Chicago, and he is going back there time and again. Now, let's spend some time on Teddy Blueger. And it was just yesterday, Blake, we were talking about how the increase in the salary cap this summer is going to create some things that we haven't seen in a few years, that we got accustomed to prior to flat cap world. It's been about 5 years now, right? It's 4 years. And one of the things we mentioned is players of the profile of Teddy Blueger are probably going to get multi-year deals this year, as opposed to the one-year deals they mostly had to settle for in previous summers. Well, fair enough. Here it comes in a 2-year deal for Teddy Blueger. He took a $100,000 haircut based on what he was making last year. But this is good work from the Canucks because you wanted another center. You didn't want to go into the season with Nils Oman as your 4th line center and really unchallenged outside of the kids, right? Sisson and Ratsu.
Mm-hmm.
You needed a penalty killer. Not that I'm fretting. And he works with a couple of your wingers, Joshua and Garland.
Yeah, he's convertible to a 3rd line center when you need it. They might need it right off the bat. And he's got the utility. The salary is such that if he does slide if they make the acquisitions that slides him back to a 4th line, you're not fretting about that number as a 4th line center. Yeah. It's a digestible 4th line center.
Well, and then as we talked about, this free agent market at center, not exactly flush. So throw out Chandler Stevenson and Elias Lindholm for a second because they're the best centers available. Throw out Duchesne as well. Monahan, but several $1 million more expensive than Blueger. Wenberg, couple $1 million more expensive than Blueger. Adam Henrique, again, $2.5 million more expensive. And then you're looking at guys like Kevin Stenlund, who just won a cup with Florida. Sam Carrick in Edmonton, who couldn't even get into the Oilers lineup on some nights. So you were not chock-a-block with that profile of centerman. You were either looking at guys who were going to be far more expensive and screw up your cap, or you were looking at guys who aren't the player that Teddy Blueger is and more cross your fingers hope bets. And in a lot of cases, the aforementioned guys I've named, either aren't penalty killers or don't necessarily have the same profile as Blueger. So, I think this is pretty wise too in looking at what's out there and just how replaceable he would be given what you're looking for with that profile of center iceman.
I wonder about the price of Adam Henrique.
Okay. So AFP Analytics, who again nailed the Dakota Joshua contract to the dollar. Everybody, you can find the entirety of its list there on the Daily Faceoff trade board.
I think for the most part,
it has served as a guide for Blake and I in the last few weeks.
For the most part, if they've missed, they've been a tad expensive. Like teams, players have been coming in a little under if they've missed it all.
Give me a name of a guy who's resigned here recently, and I'll tell you where they.
Outside of this market, you mean?
Yeah.
I mean, what did they have for Blueger even? You could check for Blueger.
Right. I haven't even checked Blueger. Blueger, they had a 2 by 2.2.
Yeah. So just under.
So they're a little more expensive. Yeah. Blueger came in.
So it's a worst case is my point. It's kind of on par or worst case.
DeMello was, they had a 5.3. He came in at 4.9.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. And they nailed the term on both those guys too.
Okay. So what do they have for Henrique?
Adam Henrique, they have a 3 by 4.3. It's 34-year-old player.
That's the thing. He's old.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you can get him for 2 years at 4. And at that point, that would be kind of
AFP would beg to differ.
Yeah, that would be kind of interesting for the Canucks if you can get him for $4 million. And that would mean, of course, then you go get a middling winger. You'd be getting the Teravainen, Mantha, DeBrusk quality winger rather than the $9 million to
yeah.
So
look, is Henrique a superior player to Blueger? Yeah. Because he brings something offensively.
He was surprisingly
that Teddy doesn't have.
And I thought I was pleasantly surprised by what Henry gave the Oilers.
Well, especially because he was hurt during the Canucks series, right? Yeah. It is really hard in the postseason to be hurt, miss games, then drop in and play, well. So if you want to tell me you think that Henrique would have been worth $2.5 million more for the Canucks, and with an extra year of term where he's 4.3, I could hear the argument, but again, that's going to probably detract from your ability to round out the rest of the roster with the profile of player you're looking for.
Well, no more
you're
than
going cheaper somewhere,
right? If you're winger, you go cheap winger. You're not going to get Guentzel and Henrique. It would be Henrique and one of the,
or you go cheaper with the top 4D.
Well, gosh, the minute you go to Guentzel again, you're not going top 4D. You're settling with Tyler Myers, who, you wonder if that's the next shoe to drop here, because if the Canucks can get Tyler Myers ink dry at a number that begins with the number 2, they're really starting to cook with gas there.
Is it Myers or Blake? Is it a goaltender? And is it Casey DeSmith? And little did we know yesterday when we had Irf Gaffar on the show that he knew a little something that we didn't, because we poo-pooed him. We said, no. She loves as your backup. He's earned that. And your cap is going to require that. Here's Irf. Believe when the season ended and management coaches had their talks, it was always the plan to try and find a veteran backup for Demko, whether that was DeSmith or someone else. She loves would take on a much larger workload and be the guy in Abbotsford. Not to mention the lesson is you needed 3 goaltenders in this year's playoffs, right? 3 goaltenders won a game in that first round against Nashville. I got to say, I'm mildly surprised by this. I thought this would be a corner they would cut with a sort of, journeyman veteran, be the number 3 in Abby, have Sheeloff's play as a backup to Thatcher Demko. I also wonder what this means about Thatcher Demko's offseason rehabilitation. Now, I know Thatcher said he was fine and could have played. Had the Canucks beaten the Edmonton Oilers in the Western Conference Final.
Matt, if he's not going under the knife,
you have to.
If he's not going under the knife, 5 months is more than enough time.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is, like it or lump it, Thatcher Demko now wears the injury-prone label. And if you're a manager, you have to sit again. Managers, what are their jobs? Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. You have to plan for not the possibility, but the likelihood that you're going to have an injury to a goaltender next year. And if it's Thatcher Demko, watch out, because that's going to heap a whole lot more pressure on your skating group, on your backup, and on your third stringer.
In every other year, on most other teams, signing Casey DeSmith again would be a prudent and logical move. But I think you said it correctly right off the bat. Of all the corners that you would feel comfortable cutting, of all the places to gamble, I would have thought that this would be the place to save a couple of mil and gamble that Shilov's and
but
and
what
Demko
do you say? So
it.
what did DeSmith play for last year? 1.8?
He played for 1.8, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, 1.8.
So how rich are you willing to go on this veteran goalie?
Like, I want to give him a pay cut. I don't want to give him that much money.
And if I'm DeSmith, I probably feel like I deserve a raise after the work I did last year.
Yeah. And I don't begrudge him for thinking
that. In fact, if I'm his agent, I say, you're not signing with Vancouver.
Okay, so split the difference. What if you just repeat the number? Still, I don't love that for the Canucks.
No, I don't love being at around $2 million.
Yeah.
I mean, I would want to be at that 1.112 where you can bury the whole salary in the minors if need be.
And at 1.5, it's not the end of the world. If you buried him in the minors at that point, you're only spending $280K.
Right.
So 1.5 certainly, but I don't think he's taking 1.5. Why would he? He had,
and I'll be honest,
lots written on him.
I have not spent a lot of time looking at the backup goalie market. I see that Kakinen is out there. I see that Samsonov is out there.
Brossoit.
Talbot. Did Brossoit not re-sign?
I don't think so.
Wedgwood is out there. So AFP Analytics says DeSmith at 1 year at $1.65 million. So they actually predict a bit of a haircut there.
Kevin Weeks just tweeted a couple hours ago, 4 goalies getting plenty of interest in the market. Thompson, Stolars, Hill, and Brossoit. 2 of them are UFAs, all 4 Stanley Cup winners as well. So,
yeah. But that's an interesting development for him. Nedeljkovic is re-signed because he was set to be that is actually a new odd premium for NHL. I shouldn't say odd, because you take a look at how many goaltenders teams have needed to get through regular seasons, to get through postseasons. So managers are adjusting accordingly and saying, we got to be 3 deep in goal. We just can't allow for a scenario where our starter, who we were hoping to play 55, 60 times, goes down and we're left with 1 backup and 1 absolute hope bet wild card. Don't know what we're getting. I get it. Again, I would have thought that the Canucks would have felt like, but we got 2 really solid guys. Let's scrimp by, see what, we can do with a journeyman, but here we are.
Yeah.
So plenty's happening around the league in advance of tomorrow's first round of the entry draft, including Buffalo and San Jose making a trade. And is it just me, if I can steal our buddy Donnie's line, but we've seen more trade up and downs around the draft, pre-draft this year than we have most years.
Yeah, it's because you have to just have a guy. It's a pretty bland draft after the first 3 picks. And
is it?
Yeah.
No, I thought it was better than that.
The general consensus is that
really?
This is not a deep draft.
What?
Yeah.
I thought it was a pretty good looking draft. So San Jose acquired the 11th overall pick.
There's like 5 teams in the top 10 that have declared they're open for business to trade the pick.
But that's because there were specific needs. Jersey and Ottawa really needed.
If they thought there were special players, they'd still stand pat.
You're not often getting special players at pick 7, pick 10, or at least special prospects. Sometimes they turn into special players. So San Jose's now picking 11th, first and 11th. And sliding down is Buffalo from 11 to 14. They have been connected to Martin Necas today from Pierre LeBrun, saying that Carolina finally has a team that's willing to meet their price, and it sounds like it may be Buffalo at pick 14. And if that's the case for Buffalo, better pick 14 than pick 11. They picked up a second-round pick from San Jose to make that move. You remember Chicago moved up to the 18th pick, Blake, from 20th with the New York Islanders. That trade happened a couple of weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, or a few weeks ago. So you've already had some maneuvering around the draft board, which is something you see a lot in the NFL, but you don't see a lot in the NFL or in the NHL, or at least not in the same measure. And you typically only see it on draft day when the pick is on the clock.
Yeah,
and
but
teams
you
are
know
sitting
your guys there.
looking, going, okay, all our guys are gone. We're interested in moving back now.
Or
that hasn't happened here.
Or a guy that that you're the only one that likes said guy, and you're 3 spots away from him. You don't want to risk missing out on him, so you trade up. But it could be a non-NHL looking draft night. In that there might be some draft day trades and still more moving about on the board as well.
Yeah, well, and in fact, there's part of me wondering whether we're going to see straight player for pick trades here. Established NHL players being traded for picks in this year's draft, and perhaps an HS to Buffalo being one of those deals. You've been asking about the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
We have a date.
And?
July 2nd.
July 2nd. Wow,
9 a.m.
Almost a full week later than it was last year.
You're getting your schedule. And I really hope that the Vancouver Canucks have been able to successfully lobby the NHL. We know this was big during the Gillis era. Get on a plane, go there, and talk to them right in the eye. What are you looking for here? Well, you're hoping to get a home game or 2 in before you go on the big, long Eastern road trip. Remember, you don't want to be buried in the month of October by the super tough, super long Eastern road trip in October. You're hopeful that when you go to the New York City area, you knock them all down and don't have to return, right?
Yep.
The Trevor Linden lesson. Once did a show from New York City on a trip with a contest winner in the old radio days. Linden walks in exasperated. You remember this? To the hotel lobby. Trevor, where were you? I just went to visit Gary Bill and the guys at the NHL head office. What was up, Trevor? He goes, we're playing the Islanders. We're playing the Rangers. We're coming back here next month to play the Devils. How?
Yeah. And not everybody deserves that consideration. Like, you don't have to give the Leafs that consideration, but the Western teams.
But here's the thing, like, most of these Eastern teams that come out, they knock them all off.
Yeah.
Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Seattle.
Yeah, you don't usually skip one.
Vancouver, Seattle, and then we go down the coast, San Jose, Anaheim, LA, right? Yeah. Like, they seem to cloister those games in a sensible, logical way for the Eastern teams when they come out.
An out-of-conference team shouldn't be flying into the same airport twice.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Right. So we'll see what the schedule brings these Vancouver Canucks. And, of course, we will be looking for the when is Chicago playing here? Because Mr. Bedard, with his broken jaw last year,
that's right,
was unable to play here, and they're in division, so we know we'll see San Jose a couple of times. We will see when Macklin Celebrini comes on home to play his first game against his hometown team. Those are 2 Canucks fans.
Last time spotted
Canucks fans
vociferously cheering on the Vancouver Canucks, and now he's going to be
starting a "Let's Go Canucks" chant, or at least joining it.
Yes,
at Rogers Arena in the playoffs. Reminder, the daily Face-Off Free Agency show begins at 8 a.m. on Monday, Canada Day. We'll be doing a show as well on Canada Day, everybody. I know most of you will be off enjoying your day and the holiday, but please join us if you can on Monday, the DFO with Frank Saravelli and former NHLers Carter Hutton, Colby Cohen, Blake, myself, Jeff, holding fort down here on Sekeres Price on Monday.
And if you are out gallivanting on the weekend and taking advantage of the long weekend, don't forget even the live show can be watched after the fact on YouTube.
Of course.
So go check it out.
Menu brought to you by Greta. Quick walk to the rink or stadium, a go-to spot for food, drink, and fun. That arcade. Before or after the game, make it a game night at Greta, 50 West Cordova at gretabar.com. We'll talk to Patrick Johnston here of the Province and Post Media on a number of Canucks fronts. We will talk to Rob Williams of the Daily Hive on a number of Canucks fronts. We also get into Roberto Luongo's hijinks with the Stanley Cup these days.
And I want to pick his brain on.
Does anybody else get to play with the Stanley Cup with the Florida
Apparently
Panthers?
Not. He's good content, right?
Well, he's the best content, but and the other thing, boy, the activity level is high with these Panthers in the Cup. We've seen it down on the beach. We've seen it on the Intercoastal on Barkov's deck. We've seen it at Roberto and Gina's Italian restaurant filled with pasta. We've seen it on Roberto's desk as he's just working away. This cup is being passed around.
I wonder if Phil Pritchard, the keeper of the cup, winces when things like, it's one thing for beer, rinse it off, ready to go. Pasta?
Yeah.
Like, is there sauce that's going to get lodged in the crease?
Well, those little crevices.
Yeah.
Like, is he there with a toothpick cleaning them out?
I'm guessing yes. A little high pressure.
You know, the job of keeper of the cup is, let's face it, it's a pretty low event most of the year. And then a team wins it. And the next thing you know, you're 24/7.
He's just in the background going, oh, no.
Can you imagine the stories that guy could tell?
Oh, yeah. I wonder if they ask him to leave it all.
Can
you stop?
I'm sure he's got an NDA, but when he retires, he should go to a book agent and say, what do you think the book could do? And if they say, we think it's, for you, 10 million, he should go to the league and say, I'm doing the book, come sue me, and then settle out of court for less than that.
What would you read the book if the names weren't there? If he just told you the hijinks without the player names being attached?
No, I think I would need to know the names. Good storytelling involves character development. I need to know the names. And what they did to it.
Big Dickens fan? Character development?
Yeah, sure.
Dickensian description? Yeah. Details.
Are you flexing the English lit degree? Is that what's happening here, Price?
A little bit.
Is that what they call it?
Dickensian.
They credit Dickens for character development?
Yeah, to a fault almost in some cases.
Well, what about Shakespeare?
Character development? No. I mean,
no. The soliloquies, of course he develops character.
Right.
They go straight to camera, straight to reader, if you will, and they tell you their inner deepest.
Oh. It's a different style of writing, plays versus...
Sure, but it's character development.
Yeah, in a different way. Dickens we're way off topic. Let's move on.
I mean, to think characters weren't developed before Charles Dickens.
In a lot of ways, sports talk is Dickensian. We get into the minutia of a player. Very Dickensian.
What book in particular do they credit with the character development?
All of them.
Okay, but what was the first one? Like, what were the early works?
I don't have the chronological order of his works in front of me.
I do.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like it's Oliver Twist.
Number one? Wow.
Well, the Pickwick Papers.
A banger right off the bat.
The Pickwick Papers, 1837.
Yeah.
Oliver Twist, 1838.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay. Bet365 time. Proud partner of Sekeres Price, and we are delighted to be working with Bet365. So, looking at some upsets in the knockout stage, now that we've gotten there, of the Euro tournament on Saturday. 8 matches in this round.
Mm-hmm.
It stands to reason that 1 or 2 are going to be upsets, right?
Yep.
So, that was my premise, and I'm going, who am I picking against? More than who am I picking for?
Right.
Who am I picking against?
Well, 2 of the big
guns.
Who
hasn't looked good?
2 of the big guns have not looked good. So I'm wondering if you're going with one of those 2, because that's what I'll take the other one.
So I looked at it and went, I'm picking against Italy. So I'll take Switzerland at plus 240.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take a bigger swing.
Slovakia.
At plus 800 over England.
Wow, you got 2 right there.
By the way.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go to the parents' place and keep the peace on that one.
Oh, really?
Well, dad's half Slovak, mom's half English. Who knows what can happen with 2 old cranky people on a Sunday morning at 9 a.m. when the footy gets intense.
It's funny, even in a down year for Germany, it doesn't feel right to go with Denmark as the dog there.
Germany's looked really freaking good, though.
That's what I'm saying. It's a down year for Germany, but all of a sudden they've sort of proven themselves that we're just fine.
Was talking with some friends at my local, and we're like, down year for Germany, and then you take a look at where the starting 11 play, like what clubs they play at, and you go, that's a really good team. I mean, some of the top clubs in the world.
Okay, so I'll pick my two dogs that I'd roll with. My two dogs, Slovenia over Portugal after the Georgian upset.
Oh, really? The Georgia upset, though, Portugal had nothing to play for. I looked at that one, too. They had nothing to play for.
Plus 750 for Slovenia. And then I'm rolling with my Turks. Plus 33 over Austria.
Yeah, well, see, I looked at that one, but Austria looks so bloody good. Or at least scored all sorts of goals, Austria.
Turkey can score, too.
Austria got 3 against the Dutch and had 1 called back. Is that right?
Yeah. They went nuts that day.
So they scored 4 goals against the Dutch? Wow. That's pretty good. Anyways, looking forward to a big weekend ahead at Euro. That's our Bet365 bets of the day. Open an account with Bet365 today. Bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use code VANBONUS all together, all one word. Patrick Johnston coming up next.
In a season like this, you never want to miss a single second of what's happening on the ice, and you want to be around your fellow fans, right? Well, Greta Bar YVR at 50 West Cordova, the perfect spot to do so. Hey, if you've got tickets, a great place to pre and post. They've got drink specials every single day. And if you don't have tickets, well, stick around and soak up the atmosphere with all your fellow fans, play all the great video games and air hockey, great air hockey setup as well at Greta Bar YVR. We'll see you there, 50 West Cordova.
This guest brought to you by the Arnold Palmer Design Whistler Golf Club. Off to an incredible start here in 2024. Amazing reviews on the course condition and the service. Reminding group organizers of 12 or more, not too early to get your September, October buddy corporate trips booked. Prime time's filling up fast. You, the group organizer, you play for free. So tell us about your groups at whistlergolf.com/groups. Patrik Johnston covers the Canucks for the Province and Post Media, and he joins us now after a busy day of Canucks.
Busy week. Yeah, I was. Well, let's put it this way: I was getting ready to pick up Molly from school, and then we had piano, and then I was going to take her sister swimming, and the Canucks signed Teddy Blueger, and I literally was walking away from school, and one of the other dads said, "Hey, PJ, what do you think about Blueger?" I'm like, "Are you kidding?" And so pulled that together, and then of course couldn't do the Zoom because that was during the swimming lesson. And then we're out of the pool, and we're at the library, lovely in North Burnaby, lovely library. And my phone buzzes, and it turns out they've traded, or they're trying to trade, or they're set to trade Ilya Mikheyev. And so you start talking to people while the children are picking up books. This is modern life for us, modern hockey reporters. Yeah, busy day. I mean, certainly I don't understand Chicago's part of this trade. Like, yeah, I guess you needed a player, and I guess, yeah, you got to get to the cap floor. And, Mikheyev, like, he doesn't hurt you defensively, but like, basically the Canucks had a contract they wanted to get rid of, and the price was a trade back 4 drafts from now. And for some reason, Sam Lafferty. And I just don't get it.
The Sam Lafferty part makes no sense.
Well,
like, what?
He's a former Hawk, so they're probably going to re-sign him.
Just great, but he's a free agent on Monday.
No, I know. Well, maybe they think other teams are on him.
Are they going to?
The other thing,
are they going to sign him for 8 years at some? I mean,
but the $700K versus the trade down. Like, how about you keep the $700K and no trade down? How about that?
Well, the other thing is, I do wonder whether they look at it and say we're going to move Mikheyev on here in a year,
maybe,
and get a second draft pick or a draft pick top of the move up out of it.
Sure.
But no, I'm with you. In comparison to what Steve Yzerman did to get money this week, this is, comparatively speaking, very good work from Patrik Allvin.
I mean, Patrik Allvin's done very good work. I talked to someone about this. I'm like, I don't understand this trade. There's some, people around the league, and they're like, well, this isn't the first time Chicago's done something like this. So the implication being maybe Chicago's just not all that organized and maybe doesn't really know what they're doing. So anyway, the Canucks benefit. They're in a better position than they were yesterday. And well, I guess we'll see what they do with this extra $4 million in cap space.
So they benefit, but here's the thing: it deepens the need for a winger. It deepens the need for speed. And is there any part next year where they'll miss Mikheyev, like as a bounce back candidate? Will they be searching for this profile of winger next year at the trade deadline,
Maybe. I mean, the speed thing, you're right. The Lafferty and Mikheyev thing, those are two quick wingers from a team that wasn't necessarily noted for quickness. Now, that's not exactly a skill that's hard to find.
That's right.
So from that standpoint, I'm not that anxious. But no, you're right, Matt. Like there are things now. It's not just about uh, the cap space; it's the talent space, and in the end, certainly Ilya Mikheyev, even with the scoring struggles, remained an NHL winger. They need to find at least one of those. And Sam Lafferty, I think, was fine as a fourth line player, although you knew probably they were just going to end up replacing him. So it's not catastrophic. By no means catastrophic, but you're right. Like this is part of what we've been told all along that in the end, this team is going to look different next year, partly because it has to, and partly because they want it to look different.
Would it be wrong or right to use this space to now jump in with both feet, back with the same old guys, with Joshua and Zadorov? How much of that is good and how much of that is folly?
Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about overpaying. Who would you overpay? I think I said from the beginning, if you're going to overpay a guy and it's not especially long term, Dakota Joshua is a decent bet given the growth in his game and the type of player he is. Certainly an opportunity now with Mikheyev gone for Joshua to fill that hole if they retain him. You knew that they've known all along, they've been saying all along, they know all along that they need a top end winger. So obviously we're still thinking about that. The Zadorov story, Dan Milstein was involved in this. I mean, I guess I had heard a second team. I mean, it was, I guess, San Jose. And in the end, Mikheyev picked to go to Chicago. But Milstein's been pretty clear. I mean, anytime I've heard anything from him, he said things have been quiet. I think the team knows what they want. So whether this has any effect, I don't know. I mean, you would think the agent agreeing to become involved in such a deal might lead to something else, but I don't have any impression that may be the case. I think in the end, we're sitting here knowing what the prices are and what the players want, and the Canucks are going to have to sit down and think about how they really do. I mean, they'll have had a plan. What do we do if we get rid of Mikheyev? What does that let us do? It certainly lets them re-sign people. So the fact that they are likely to run some of these guys back now seems obvious, but in the end, we're still waiting. We're at 5 days out, 4 days out. You never say never until it gets done.
What did you make of the Teddy Blueger deal?
Listen, a player that came in was what we expected him to be, which was a quality penalty killer, a guy that I mean, the one thing that Patrik Allvin had suggested was that he thought he could score a lot more. I think we can see why in the end he has not been a 15-goal scorer in the NHL. Is he just doesn't have those hands, but he does everything else really well. And a handy communicator, a smart guy to have on your team. In the end, hopefully he's your fourth line center. I think that's the best role for him. The Canucks, I think, really do want to shore up that third line center, and I don't think that's Pius Suter. I think they would like to find someone else to sit in that spot. How they do that, again, comes back to that cap space. But yeah, I mean, he's fine. He's good. He's fine. I don't mind bringing him up. The numbers fine for what the role is. You think about it, it's still less than half what Jay Beagle was making to do the same job. And Teddy Blueger is a better hockey player than Jay Beagle was when the Canucks signed him. So that's maybe a low bar to clear, but it's still worth considering what we've seen here before. And yeah, Blueger was an effective player. I think he's a handy player to have, and it's fine value for him.
They've avoided overpayment to this point.
For the most part, yeah.
Alan Walsh suggesting today that they could have got 9.5 if it was just about the money, but there's no world in which he was getting 9.5. So they've avoided mistakes like that at the very least.
Yeah.
I mean, what overall have the Canucks put themselves in a position to succeed here over the next few days if they want to make a trade, and certainly come July 1st?
I think so. They're not. They've been smart in how they've managed what cap space they've had to date. There have been a couple misfires, absolutely, Mikheyev being one of them. But they've been cautious and careful and deliberate in how they've used what's in front of them. And Go back to the deadline. Like they probably could have made another deal or two, and they chose not to. Even though the picks, even knowing that the picks that they had were late round picks, which aren't terribly useful, as I wrote about today. Like late round picks just don't lead to successful players very much anymore. Even looking at that and knowing that they probably weren't going to get much value out of the draft, they still held firm and decided not to use that capital to do a move that I think might have helped them in the short term. But they sat back and said, listen, there's going to be deals that we are going to like probably better at the draft in the summer. There's a lot of things happening around the league. We know this. This is as good a position as they've been in a long time. I mean, we probably have to go back to the Gillis era. There were challenging times with the cap and the Sedins and the famous trip to re-sign Sedins, but it is of that ilk. Of you've got a strong team here. How do you make it better? And that was what Gillis and his group strongly understood, was that, listen, we've inherited a solid core here, but what was working or what they were doing before wasn't working. So we got to try something different. We got to be smart in how we do this. And that's where this current regime is as well.
So what do you think? Guentzel and some spare parts, or the mid-level shopping spree? That's our poll question today. How should they go about doing it?
Well, where do we put a guy like Sam Reinhart? Is that a mid-level shopping spree?
No. I mean, he is a Guentzel equivalent.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a Guentzel type.
Chance on Reinhart?
Possible. I mean, I think I certainly, obviously there'd be hometown interest. I think he's certainly a name that I think there's a name there that makes sense. I don't know necessarily how hot it would be, but there's a player that's Guentzel-like. And
so we haven't heard them connected to Reinhart. Do you know something here, Peach?
I'm just wondering. I'm mostly wondering aloud. I heard this from someone, but I don't have an extra bit, so I can't say definitively that's a thing. But it's something that I think makes sense given what the team is interested in. And yeah, we'll see. I cannot say there is hot interest or anything like that. But it is something I heard someone speculate earlier, and I was wondering, okay, that actually makes some sense. So it's something to kick tires on. Didn't have time to figure it out before I came on here.
I mean, he's got a cup now, right? Like, maybe he, is interested.
He's double digits, though, isn't he? And he may not be a double-digit player, but he's going to make double-digit millions, isn't he, after 57 goals in the cup?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're able to do and what he's after, right? Like he's now, he's 28. Is he after a huge long-term deal, or is he put himself in a different category? Like, if that's a guy that you can get, I mean, he's more expensive than Guentzel. I mean, I will be clear. I gave him a Selke vote. I've been very impressed with his two-way game, especially as a winger. It makes sense to me as a player. I'm not sure the price makes sense. That's right. And so that's why I wasn't, that's why I was saying, listen, it's a thing that I can line up, but it's not necessarily something that I know for certain is something this team would actually do given the price.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm at, look, what are we talking about? If they don't get Guentzel, what do you do? Right. Like, where do you get to? Toffoli, I think, is fun and interesting, but that's a mid-tier guy, right? Like, is that what we mean? So that's what we're talking about. And I think at the end of the day, part of the reason why you're finding this space is because of exactly what we said before. Like, you're trying to retain some of your guys, and it gives you a little more room to work on getting someone big, and it saves you room on getting someone big. And I don't have no doubt that that this team is after something big, and that's why I wonder about somebody like Sam Reinhart.
Dakota Joshua has re-signed with the Vancouver Canucks. It's a 4-year deal at $3.25 million. In full disclosure, where you're getting word of this as we record. Initial impressions.
Well, I mean, it's like we said just a minute ago. There's a player that's done very, very well for himself. He's grown his game, proved to be an effective force in the regular season. The question now becomes, can he do that better than he did this year in the playoffs. That we saw a great first game in the playoffs and then not a lot from him, and then a bits and pieces here and there. And certainly enjoyed watching him grow as a player, grow as a person. That guy that became a lot more confident speaking wise. I remember, very early on, kind of going up to him and being kind of alarmed. Oh, someone wants to talk to me, which I suppose, a guy who hadn't played a lot in the NHL, also came from St. Louis, which isn't a very busy media market, even if it's in a well-established organization. And by the end of this year, he is a guy that was fully ready to talk and had some banter. And, you had it sounds weird to say, but from a media standpoint, a bit of a throwback kind of guy. Like, not every player, and this wasn't always true, but he was a guy that had some ongoing banter and a willingness to sort of engage with ongoing storylines. And I selfishly, from a media standpoint, great to have. He's also got some really interesting insights into how the game works. I think he's a smart guy. He sees how things work. He knows that I think help explains why he was able to improve himself as a player and get better at what it was that he did best, and which is forechecking, learning how to use his size, getting his hands in on in and around the net, finding ways to finish. And 4 years obviously is a lot to commit to a guy who has really one strong year of play, but 2 years of growth. But at the end, it's you're not overcommitting to his 30s, and
he just turned 28. So you've got you remember, you don't even have to pay him as a 32-year-old. Don't use that math. You're playing a full year as a 28, 29, 30, 31-year-old. That's not bad. That's not bad.
And let's be clear. In the end, a player's prime is in their early to mid 20s. So he's sort of at the tail end of that. But a player with his kind of profile, a big, strong skater, physically imposing to a degree, those guys are able to maintain that until their early 30s. And some players are just late bloomers. And so, what is this a question? As someone pointed out to me in my draft story, we have this notion of, late round picks take longer. And they're like, is it really that late round picks take longer, or teams are just more risk averse with late round picks, that they should just let the guys play? And maybe that is the case with him. But either way, he's found his way in his mid to late 20s. And he's a quality player, and he's been a quality player. And I think there's every reason to think he'll be a quality player for the duration of this contract.
I mean, his pace, here's the good news. I don't think anybody's going to expect Dakota Joshua to be better than what he was. If he can replicate what he just did, he's still worth that money, right? Like, you're not looking for further development. He was on a 23-goal pace this year with 18 goals in 63 games. The question is, can he run that back and be the player?
Yeah, and listen, the price point, $3.2 million per season. that's a nice number for what they want him to be, right? Think about it. That's less than Ilya Mikheyev, right? And he was brought here to do the same thing as Ilya Mikheyev, which is help kill penalties and maybe score a little. And he scored more than Ilya Mikheyev, right? He's been a 20-goal. He was essentially a 20-goal scorer this year.
And you know what? Ilya Mikheyev's not going anywhere if he makes 3.2. I really don't think so.
Probably not. Yeah. So it's a handy little signing, and I would say this is kind of what I imagined it would be. I don't necessarily I thought it'd be 4 years, but I thought it would be a 3-something, and they've got him at 3-something, and I think that's a number they wanted to get him at. So here we are.
Do you think they've gone ahead and done Joshua because Zadorov is still saying no?
I mean, I said from the start, I said already, I think in the end, Joshua was a guy that they really wanted to keep. He was higher up the priority list. Zadorov they liked, but only at a certain price. I think that was the important thing. And essentially to answer your question, I guess so. I think they've laid out their price points. They got Joshua on a price point I think they were comfortable with. And they're still sitting on a price point with Zadorov that I mean, unless things change by the time, because things could change in the next 2 hours. My impression for the whole time has been in the end, it's about price point and willingness to accept price point, and the fact that there's a guy like Brendan Dillon out there who may not be as exciting and thrilling as Zadorov, but is a very similar player in so many respects. If that's where the Canucks are able to go as an alternative, it would make sense to me why they would be holding firm on Zadorov.
I'm going to be shocked if they sign Zadorov at this point.
Yeah. I think this is kind of the canary in the mine shaft.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for having to force you to repeat yourself on today.
Well, no, Patrik Allvin did this to us.
Yeah,
it's not you. Don't worry.
But you have a marvelous week, and we will catch up with you next Thursday.
It's going to be a busy couple of days for sure, but got the NHL awards and all that. So
yeah, lots coming.
Yep. Take care, guys.
Yep.
Northlands Golf Course. Download the free app and book tee times with a touch of your thumb. And while you're on course, open the app for hole-by-hole GPS and track your score. 6 to 90-day reservations. Jump the queue. Lock in your date for $10 per player booking fee. Limited daily availability. Check it all out. golfnorthlands.com.
The Vancouver Canadians are back at the Nat. Catch fireworks, giveaways, and Friday nooners all spring and summer long. Get your tickets at CanadiansBaseball.com.
Our next guest is the national sports editor of the Daily Hive and its Offside Sports vertical, the one and only Rob, the hockey guy from Twitter. Rob Williams joins us here on Sekeres Price. How you doing?
Doing great, guys. Yeah, I'm buzzing with all these trades and transactions, and there's a draft coming. They don't have any picks, but free agency, I think, is the big one this year. Where for Canucks fans, just to skip right past the draft. They're going to or are we going to be profiling like the third round pick? Where that's going to get like so much play and buzz, and we're going to know everything about the third rounder this year. But
I don't like Yanni Yermo, but no, you're quite right.
Unless they read the tea leaves and really don't think they've got a shot at Jake Guentzel and all this cap space is for a trade. Is to take on somebody else's big contract.
Well, but trade what, Blake? Like they don't have a ton of tradable assets other than, Rob, they don't have a lot of picks this year. By the time this operation is done, they may not have a lot of picks next year or the year after either. If this goes where they want it to go, I think we got to wrap our heads around trading the next couple of first round picks because I think the team's going to need fortification. And I don't think there are a lot of young roster players that they can afford to move out. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like I've been saying this for a few years, but the trade the first round pick is a card you can only play so many times. Like you can't do it every single year. I suppose you can, but then you're going to pay one hell of a price down the road. I do think they need to sort of pump the brakes on first rounders, at least for the time being. They're in an interesting spot because they are going for it. So it doesn't, you don't want to half go for it. Like if you're going for it, go for it. But I think you've got to do it smartly. I think that finding ways to recoup draft picks where possible, I think is the way to go. Like doing it on the fly a little bit. Think back to like Anthony Beauvillier, you get a draft pick for him, and then you move that pick in another trade. I think this Ilya Mikheyev trade, like they get a fourth rounder back, like that's not nothing. Like that, at least you get another pick back in the cupboard. I think if you get opportunities, next season to move off players that you don't really have much use for, grab a draft pick. Try to restock the cupboard a little bit like that while trying to definitely go for it because they're unquestionably in their window now. Like this is where they need to be making a push.
Rob, the Mikheyev trade, it deepens the need for a winger. It deepens the need for speed up front and on the wing. What are the chances that they miss Ilya Mikheyev next season? What are the chances they have to go out and acquire a profile like Ilya Mikheyev next year by the deadline?
Yeah, I do think that there's a chance that they'll miss Mikheyev. Like I think that he's, he could have a bounce back year. Certainly, look at some of the players that the Canucks have kind of cut bait on in recent years. Oliver Ekman-Larsson comes back, has a nice season on a Stanley Cup winner. Obviously, not worth the the salary that he was going to get in Vancouver. So I don't think that's a regrettable move necessarily, but like, you know, he showed that he could still play. I looked at Jason Dickinson. Like, Dickinson goes to Chicago. He had one bad year, and it came in his first year in Vancouver, and they paid to get off of his contract. He proved to be like, he was the guy that he was in Dallas, right? Like he was the guy that they thought they were getting. He had an off year. So you do need to be careful about overreacting to, you know, short-term failures or an off season. Now with Mikheyev, I mean, he's got the injury concerns. Is he going to bounce back now that he's, you know, not having to deal with that? Or is this going to like affect him? Like, he's a guy that speed is his calling card. Is this injury going to forever affect his speed? I think it might. And then I think the other thing with Mikheyev, it's not like he had like a long resume of success in Toronto. Like, everyone's talking about like how he played in Toronto. He had one good year in Toronto, like as a, you know, where you could say that, okay, he's a top 6 player, just 1 year. So it's not like you're going, okay, he's going to get back to that guy that we know he is. I mean, when the Canucks signed that contract with the Mikheyev that we knew, I was like, I don't know, that's a lot of money for Ilya Mikheyev. Wasn't he a third liner on the league?
Leafs fans were kind of snickering in the background. Leafs fans were like, he's not going to score goals for you. I hope you know that. So
yeah. And then when he came to Vancouver, he was supposed to be he was going to be this great penalty killer, and he was going to help them in that regard. He didn't really play a lot on the PK for them. So I do think he could go to Chicago and have a nice season, but like, how much is it worth it to find out? And I think that's the big thing. So I do think it made sense to get off that contract. 2027 is not even a real year. Like, don't even worry about that. You know, at least to get rid of a second round pick. That was the thing that was worrying me. It was like, okay, they already don't have a lot of picks in the next couple drafts. You know, you push it down the line a little bit. I think it's a little bit more palatable.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the bad news is it's a second and retention. The good news is it's a second for a fourth, so it's a 64 place trade down, and the retention isn't too grievous. Okay, so now what, Williams? We're asking on our poll question, what should the Canucks do with their cap space? Guentzel and spare parts, mid-level shopping spree. Of course, there's the Zadorov issue and contract perhaps before free agency. What should they do with their cap space?
Yeah, I think I'm like everyone else, you know, listening to this podcast right now that has been playing around with Cap Friendly all morning on their interactive tool to figure out just what the Canucks can fit under the cap. Like, this isn't a get out of jail free card now. Like, they can't bring Zadorov, Joshua, Myers, and bring in Guentzel. Like, that's not going to happen. But they can do 2 or 3 of those moves probably. Like, they can, and for me, Guentzel, I think I've talked myself into it. I think that if they're going for it, and they certainly seem to be, that seems like a really good piece. Like, that's a guy that can score goals for you. That's a guy that fits a need, you know, on Pettersson's wing. If he doesn't fit with Pettersson, you can play him with Miller. You know that Besser fits with Pettersson as well. You get a guy that's a proven playoff performer. Like, his numbers in the playoffs are spectacular. So we don't know what the numbers are. I would be fine with them making a couple of other moves instead, like finding a Teravainen and kind of doing it in the aggregate a little bit like that. It provided you get value. What I don't want to see them do is just give top dollar and top term to Zadorov and Joshua. I think that those moves make me a bit nervous. I like the fact that that they fit with your team, but I get really nervous when you start paying, you know, I think I said this last week, but you've got Zadorov, who has not proven to be a top 4 defenseman for long stretches of his career. Now, all of a sudden, we're saying he's a definite top 4 defenseman because he had a good month.
Yeah,
that makes me nervous. Same thing with Dakota Joshua. Like, he's had 2 good seasons, like really just the one very good season where you think, okay, maybe he could be a second line winger or a high-end third-line winger. I worry that there's a bit of, you could make a similar mistake that you just made with Mikheyev in those deals, where you're paying guys hoping that they're going to be something that they haven't proven for a long stretch in their career. So I'd be a bit nervous to give guys like 4 or 5 years and top dollar in free agency if you're going to do that. If you're going to start throwing huge money in term at those guys, hey, why not go for a bona fide star in Guentzel and bring him
the argument is a decent one, but I also think that the clubs fall in love with their own guy and don't want to see the change, and so they end up paying more for that guy. What do you think Canuck fans think about running it back? I mean, they fell in love with this team by the end of the playoff series because of the high drama and the high emotion. But ultimately, do you think Canuck fans will be okay losing to the good stories of the year in Joshua and Zadorov? And I frankly do think that the team will be okay, even though they're very useful players. But what do you think the fan base? They finally glommed onto a team, Rob. This was a Cinderella run in a lot of ways of just 2 rounds. But, making the playoffs felt like another chapter of the Cinderella story as well. So how do you think Canuck fans will react to pretty sweeping change of the team from the Stars, from just below the Stars on down?
Yeah, and those 2 guys gave them such swagger last year.
Yeah,
like Zadorov, especially with, I think the totality of having Soucy and Myers and Zadorov, having those 3 big defensemen on the back end, really changed the vibe, the mentality of the Canucks defense, and gave them a look that we have not seen in Vancouver in a very long time. And Zadorov was the guy, right? Like, he was the guy chirping Evander Kane and putting him into the players' bench during the playoffs, scoring big goals, laying the body. It's going to be tough for them to see guys like Zadorov and Joshua go. But I think it's going to depend on what else do they do. I think hockey fans in the city are smart. Like, if they land a big-time free agent, then I think people are going to be excited about landing that big-time free agent and being okay with those guys walking out the door. But certainly, I think people are clamoring for Zadorov, certainly, and Joshua to a lesser degree. I think they're definitely.
Question: is the Guentzel option the better PR move for this team, Rob? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, let's see the dollar figure. I mean, if it's the rumored amount, I think there'll be some disagreement, but I think people are going to be excited. They're going to look at it and go, okay, provided they can fill in the rest. I think that, if you bring in like a Brendan Dillon and save some money and then say, okay, that's your replacement for Zadorov, I think people will be, I think people can definitely get on board with that. Like, bringing in a star player, people will be excited about that, on July 1st.
Okay, last question here. Been following Roberto Luongo's antics with the Stanley Cup?
It's been outstanding. I mean, he obviously legendary on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it right now. But I think that the fact that we are seeing Luongo now back on social media with the Stanley Cup, I don't know if he's getting the cup more than others.
I'm wondering. Yeah. Like, he's got a lot of time with it.
Yeah, like, is he pulling rank there and going like, "Hey, I've been with how long I've been with this club." Yeah, we saw him eating pasta out of the Stanley Cup. I saw another photo where they had a pizza on the top of the Stanley Cup. I mean, it was just chef's kiss, amazing content, just made for Daily Hive. I thank Roberto Luongo for his contributions to this little quiet period right before free agency, because like the emotion of Luongo, like when he lifted that cup in the air, like for the first time, just awesome. I think it's everything that we thought it would be, and I think everyone in Vancouver is thrilled for him.
Yeah, just wrong building, wrong employer. But yeah, you're quite right, Rob. Great stuff, buddy. Thank you for this. We'll catch up next Thursday. We'll have all sorts of news then.
Sounds great.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?